You two, please take it away.
All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Tina Khan. I am an adaptive leadership practitioner. I work in a lot of spaces bringing this idea of adaptive leadership to our frontline works, many grassroots organizations, and how we can be, I love the word Susan used, strategically navigating some of these waters right now. And so I'm very excited to bring some of this work to you. And my dear friend and colleague, Sister Heart. Kalia, I'll let you have a few words here. How are you doing today?
I am excited to be here. I'm also holding a lot of peaceful space today, but energy levels will definitely be up. And kind of like Susan said, the thing that I love about being in this food system space is one, we come from so many different backgrounds and we kind of move in and out of different spaces within this whole ecosystem and find one another in trainings and in-person things. So it always feels like an opportunity to, continue to build our relationships over time.
Could not agree more. I think the heart centered of all of this work is the relationship building, and what that means to doing work out in communities for systemic change for future generations. So if you are new to the course, welcome today. But several of us, I see some familiar names, are joining from our previous session. We've designed this intentionally that each session builds and compounds on the previous material. So with respect to time, I would love to have two voices, if able, to come off mute. Give us a little thoughts or feedback from session one and what's maybe been rattling around with you since we were last together. Got one in the chat. Indy, I hear adaptive. Okay. Yes, adaptation throughout. Would love to hear a beautiful human on this Zoom right now to get some voice kicking us off. Thoughts
saying
or
what
what's
saying what needs to be said and turning up the heat.
turning up the heat? Great. Turning up the heat is a necessary act of leadership, and I'm so excited to hear that rolling over and coming in from session one because we're going to go into our comfort zone. And sometimes turning up the heat for the sake of project work, it's necessary and it makes us uncomfortable. So we're going to do some work on that today. So with that, it's going to be a lot. So here's where we're headed today. We've got some tools, some exercises similar to session one. We're going to be giving you a lot. Rest assured, today is about practicing. You're going to be in a lot of spaces and opportunities to practice and do this work. So make sure whatever respective space you're at, you've got some paper, you've got a digital device, you're able to start engaging with some of these exercises in yourself, and then you're going to be doing that in some teamwork. So here's where we're going. It's a lot. You get all of these materials and the slides and the shared Google Drive thereafter. But with the givens, we understand it's a lot. There's enough content here to warrant a year-long intensive course. We've said that, but we've been graceful and wonderful enough to be able to have 3 sessions together, which I'm super grateful and appreciative, from my heart to yours. I think the word that's going to stick with me today, my given, is the word Susan used at the top of our time together, which is strategic. We're in some unprecedented times, and those of us in our workspaces, frontline, nonprofit, systems change work requires us to be more intentional and strategic given the unprecedented times that we're sitting in. We are often working up against the machines of status quo that tell us this is the way we've always done things. And therefore, we need to have new tools and approaches to address that status quo in some of those institutions. And please know, your work at any level of any degree is not only welcomed, appreciated, but it's critical and necessary. So celebrating the work you do is what makes future generations the much better. So thank you from my heart to yours. And grounding ourselves today with some expectation management. What we won't be offering are some technical tools by way of software and budgeting. We've got some great tools. Kalia has captured those. They'll be in the slide deck at the very end, and those links are live for you to use. This experience is not about how to better manage people or provide a how-to booklet or guide for you to go forth and do this work. But what it most definitely will be is providing processes for you to design and manage your work better and more effectively, because we are here to have lasting systemic impact. And in order to do that, we've got to look at project design with a framework mindset if we're to take on some sustainable change in what we're doing. So getting us kicked off with that, I will turn it back over to my amazing friend Kalia to get us launched into some communication strategies.
So let's go back one more slide. This is something else that we tried to ground ourselves in with our first session, and it'll be present across all sessions, that we're not just about project management here. This is about creating a project leadership ecosystem. So throughout all of our session, we will continue to reference back to this, the fact that, yes, in project management, we have a purpose, we plan, and there are procedures associated with that, how we go about doing things. And we take into consideration the climate that we're operating in, both sociocultural and socio-political. But we are also making sure that we keep in mind that this is a generational work. And in between here, we are looking for opportunities to practice adaptive leadership. So let's go to the next slide. So today we are going to cover a broad range of content focused on internal and external communications for building project support. So we started laying the foundation during our first session with an activity, gauging level of care against our tolerance threshold. We had an introduction to bias and conflict styles, and also talked about raising the heat, which some of you mentioned in the chat or coming off mute at the beginning of this session. Next slide. And we're going to pick back up with interpersonal conflict. Next slide. So quick review. This was in our first session, just to ground us all in this topic. Conflict styles. They refer to our approach to conflict. So this model compares the level of assertiveness that you're engaging versus the level of cooperation you're engaging in your approach to conflict. So a competing style is highly assertive, but not so cooperative, whereas a collaborating style is not so assertive, but high in cooperation. And then we have an accommodating style, which is low in assertiveness and low in cooperation, whereas an avoidant style is low in both assertiveness and cooperation. And this is just something to keep in mind throughout many of today's planned activities and content. And just another note that our style can be influenced by the subject matter at hand, our level of care and tolerance for it, and the relationship we have with the person or people we're in conflict with. Next slide. So I'm going to talk to you guys about a conflict goal model called TRIP. So inevitably, we experience some level of conflict in our projects because the common denominator with all projects is that they involve people. So over these next few slides, we're going to discuss strategies for conflict transformation. We do have an application activity planned for you all a little bit later in this session, so you may want to jot down some notes through this section. The TRIP model being introduced here helps you to distinguish what kind of conflict is at hand, so that you can craft a more appropriate response. So there are 4 questions defining different types of conflict. Topical conflicts center on what we want. Relational conflicts center on who we are to one another in the conflict. Whereas identity conflicts center on who you are in that interaction. And process conflicts center on how communication will occur. So we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about each conflict type in the next couple of slides. Next slide. So topical conflict occurs when you and the other party have different ideas about what to do, where to go, what decisions to make, how to allocate resources, and other externally objectifiable issues. So the goals you're trying to achieve in topical conflicts, they can be listed, argued, supported by evidence, and broken down into pros and cons. Next slide. Relational conflict goals, on the other hand, define how those involved in the conflict desire to be treated by one another. It can involve deciphering how much interdependence there is in the relationship, or how much there should be, or it might be about determining the level of influence people have. And in a relational conflict, everything that is said has a relational message. And these conflicts can easily spiral because our interpretations differ. And that can lead to more relational conflict. And for that reason, this kind of conflict feels more urgent than a topical conflict. Next slide. Identity conflicts. The ironic thing about identity conflicts is that they're not so easy to identify. They often present as something tangible, not necessarily what they really are, though. That could sound like someone having claims of unjust treatment, refusing to step back from a position, or even suppressing conflict. Next slide. So whereas, from the beginning, topical conflict is about what's happening, process-based conflict is about how something happens. Examples of this include consensus, giving equal talk time, voting, or talking informally before making a decision. Very procedural. Next slide. So just to finish up this section, even though these conflict distinctions that we've provided to ground us for a lot of today's activities are really useful, conflict can be just as easily about everything as it is about only one thing at hand. So case in point, relational and identity concerns will almost always overlap. Who you are with others is related to how the relationship is conducted. So identity and relational issues are the drivers of disputes, and they often underlie the more straightforward seeming topic and process issues. Our goals for relational and identity concerns will often emerge as topic conflicts. So like the example here in purple, this person is prioritizing like one thing over another, essentially. They're saying that I know this critical conversation needs to happen, but there are more pressing issues to address. There's the topic that's coming out on top. But why they're prioritizing one thing over another is really the underlying conflict. What hasn't been said is that this person feels their concerns are not important to others. That's a relational issue. And as a result, they feel they're always speaking out about things that others aren't. And that's an identity issue. But sometimes people aren't able to identify relational goals, and then they act things out at this tangible topic level because that's easier to grasp. So, for example, someone feels undervalued by their team and wages an ongoing persuasive campaign to change a system in place. Identity-driven disputes can also look like I'm right, are not, am too. So, having laid some of the groundwork here, Tina is going to pick up on this by talking about uncertainty in conflict.
Yeah, thanks, Kalia. This is really great to assess, we call diagnose, to assess the types of conflict that we're encountering. And face it, y'all, we're in the business of people. We work with others. We are in community work centered around working with stakeholders. These are humans. We encounter conflict everywhere. And a part of that is going to require us to get used to uncertainty and that conflict. Okay. So the adaptive leadership component that's tied to this is wholly about the internal work of you. And this is your capacity to sit with that unknown uncertainty and varieties and types and layers of conflict, okay? The good thing is we can't expect to will away our discomfort. Okay, we practice identifying it, being aware of it, so that we can act, as Susan said, strategically, intentionally, and with purpose. Hold to purpose from session 1, right? So we're going to do some activity right now and practicing our comfort zone. Rest assured, this is your quiet, reflective workspace. This will not be shared out. So give yourself the gift of reflection and time and kind of digging deep into the things that are comprised within your comfort zone and what might be a stretch for you. So please have ready some materials to do some work on. But let's look at this idea of uncertainty and conflict, okay? Here's our givens. We understand that conflict is normal. We need conflict to make progress. That's the discord that we talked about in session 1 in raising the heat to get others in a productive zone. But for own reflection, really be aware of what that discomfort and uncertainty feels like to you, right? When you know you're in some ambiguity, what does it feel like? When you know you're working with stakeholders, that there's some conflict or there's uncertainty of the process and work forward, what is that awareness to yourself? It might be an act of leadership to identify the opportunities where we can make a conscious choice to lean in to that conflict for learning or to turn away. And recognize that the clearer we are able to articulate and hold up our purpose, the more willing we might be to tolerate that uncertainty and conflict. That's our hold to purpose. Okay. Our actions here for ourselves are, how might we intervene differently? How might I show up differently in this conflict when I have the temptation to lower the heat, to make peace so that we can all feel comfortable, right? Resist that urge, right? Session 1, we talked about the productive zone and the zone of disequilibrium with heat. We want to hold others with enough discomfort to make some progress. And we're going to build our tolerance for tough conversations because our aim here is systemic change. And we're going to work some of these topics of power and bias and identity later with Kalia's activity. But here's where I'd like to go right now. We've often used the word bandwidth. Okay. Do you have the bandwidth to take that on? And I think the inference there is that it's a capacity. But in adaptive leadership, your bandwidth is your comfort zone. Okay. Quite literally, as we navigate the world, all of the humans that exist and all the situations that we encounter, we are there. And within this beautiful essence of me, I have strengths, I have vulnerabilities, and I have beautiful triggers. And I like to say beautiful triggers because they're tied to our core values. What uniquely makes you you are also the things that will make you triggered when you encounter certain people in certain situations in the world. And the essence here with conflict management and raising that heat is to get towards that edge of our comfort, is to get towards the edge to show up differently, to be more effective. We're not risking our edge to preserve our comfort. We're doing some things to be more effective and strategic to mobilize others. So what I'd like to do right now is I'm going to hold about 3 minutes of some quiet time and space for you to reflect and jot down what are the beautiful things that make you uniquely you. What are the things within your comfort zone that are your strengths that you lean into? Some things that you know leave you feeling a little bit more vulnerable, possible topics, people's situations. And if you have the capacity, identify a few things, phrases, words, individuals that are triggering to you that rub up against core values. I'm going to hold time and space for about 2 to 3 minutes.
Tina, we've got a request in the chat box if you could show the examples again, please.
Thank Thank you. Sure. Wonderful work. We'll take about 1 more minute. All right. We're going to open up our voices and get some conversation in this. Please know this is in the shared drive. You will have access to this. Please take this tool and do it with your teams and continue your self-reflection of the beautiful things that make you you. But how is this related to conflict and the types of conflict we encounter in doing our work? Because we're given the opportunity to stretch ourselves every moment of all of our projects and interactions with others out in the communities. So given the idea that there's opportunities to exercise leadership and stretch, I'm curious, where are those moments? Where do you see those moments most?
External communication. So just a quick note on that. Let's go to the next slide. And calling back to our thesis, or so to speak here, I want to call to attention the systemic nature of what we're talking about. Even though we're talking about personal triggers, I'm looking at a comment that Lindsay put in the chat box about how, sometimes it is a reflection of the organization that you're working in and nonprofit culture, these larger societal factors can really affect how we are showing up in spaces. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in this section on external communications. Next slide. Okay. So this, I can say, has absolutely been a core piece of the kind of work that I engage in. And I don't think I've ever worked with an institution that isn't trying to figure out how to do this, engaging underrepresented voices. There is a lot to read into that we're constantly trying to, quote unquote, figure that out. But if I were to capture the essence of this, I'd simply say, it's all about how you're showing up. So let's discuss how people show up. Next slide. So systems emerge from an organized set of decisions. Decisions are based and made on values. Values are shaped by beliefs, which are informed by our experiences. Our experiences, in turn, form our identities. So this concept of identity, it's multifaceted, encompassing all the topics that you may have heard come up in the form of isms like class, ism, sex, ism, race, ism, able, ism, age, ism, so on and so forth. all things that shape our identity and our experience in the world. Our identities also go hand in hand with culture, which simply put is a set of traditions, beliefs, values, customs, and ways of life of a group of people. This here is Barry's classification of acculturation, and it compares the kind of relationships people seek among one another against maintaining their heritage and culture. So this model represents the strategies of ethnocultural groups. We'll go through and talk a little bit about each thing here. Assimilation occurs when an ethnic group is absorbed into whatever the dominant culture is, thus discarding their own culture of origin. With integration, the ethnic group embraces both the dominant culture and their own. Separation occurs when an ethnic group prioritizes their own culture, thus avoiding the dominant culture. And then marginalization occurs when the ethnic group rejects both the dominant culture and their own. Next slide. Okay. So marrying this, larger society has its own strategies. Multiculturalism promotes the idea that different cultures can coexist and thrive within a society, recognizing and valuing cultural diversity. Melting pot suggests that different cultures blend together, eventually forming a new unified culture. Exclusion involves denying certain groups access to resources, opportunities, or social participation. And then segregation separates people based on cultural or ethnic background. This is all to say that we exist within and function in relation to systems. Systems are based on rules, both spoken and unspoken, and our orientation to and position within these systems impact interpersonal relationships and interactions. So having critical cultural competency attempts to narrow some of these gaps, if not an experience, shared experience, and understanding, so that we can reorient ourselves to one another in the systems in which we exist. Next slide. So a little bit about organizational bias. Situated between groups of people and broader society are organizations and institutions, et cetera. And they have their own goals and strategies, meaning we have another layer of cultural complexity to throw into the mix. Any system operates again on a set of beliefs and values, creating its own culture and biases. So if you'll recall from our last sessions, for those of you who were with us, bias is inherent. Unconscious or implicit bias occurs outside of our control. Whereas, on the other hand, explicit bias is based on attitudes and beliefs about a person or group. Explicit bias is problematic because it can lead to behaviors and practices, including here, confirmation and conformity bias, or when we talked about it last time, it was groupthink. So this leads us into talking about some other forms of organizational bias. Authority bias occurs when you have an authoritative figure, they're assumed to be the most accurate and overarching decision maker, thus a forego exploration of other opportunities that might exist. So blindly following reliable leadership is not uncommon in most organizations and is seldom analyzed until it fails. Loss aversion bias refers to the fear of exploring better or more viable options to a decision that's already been made. And oftentimes that's due to a fear of losing out on whatever the projected benefits are of the direction you're already going in. You often find this in organizations undergoing a transformation. However, avoiding exploring other opportunities for fear of loss is common for most organizations across all scales. And we often do that personally too, not just in organizations. Organizations are just sets of people. Self-serving bias refers to biased decisions whose sole purpose is to enhance one's own self-esteem, regardless of the outcome. I think in our last activity, somebody was sharing about, people having these self-serving means in terms of the way they go about things and being very blatant about it. So you might see this among strategic leaders, especially in competitive environments, being the authority who is always right, often leads to decisions that are unproductive to the overall organization. So maybe as we're talking through some of these biases, it's sounding familiar to you and your experiences across organizations and institutions. Here's another: strategic misrepresentation. That's a common and often dangerous bias that's prevalent on most levels. It's all pervasive, especially at the strategic level, and it involves focusing on only the benefits and growth of a strategic decision. And it discards all the costs and risks associated with that decision. And then lastly, we've got status quo bias. And it's the most common form of organizational bias. It too is rooted in the fear of change and results in a failure to respond to changing circumstances, which, as we talk about the need for adaptive leadership, is antithetical to exactly what we're trying to accomplish. Next slide. So, power. This is a slide about power and leadership. When you have bias and resources meet, then we're talking about power. So institutional and organizational leaders influence workplace culture, and that in turn can influence the way that institution or organization is showing up in community and even with one another internally. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but it illustrates how power is exercised as formal or informal power, or by sanctions or identification. Then we have types of power, including legitimation, punishment, rewards, informational control, expert knowledge, relational power, charismatic power. And then it's also going on a scale, whether it is a more personal kind of power or a more positional kind of power. So let me just take a pause here to ask you all some of your thoughts, or even share about experiences that might be resonating when we talk about organizational bias, and then how you see it show up in power and leadership. Okay, thank you, Andrew. So bias and conflict go hand in hand with power dynamics, and underrepresented voices are usually at a power disadvantage. The way organizations, institutions, and the like show up or are in relationship with communities can also be looked at in terms of power over, power with, power within, and power to. So power over is built on force, coercion, domination, and control. It's usually what people default to when they're thinking about or discussing power. Power over says that power is a finite resource held among the few, and thus it works from a fear and scarcity place. You can achieve short-term goals effectively with it sometimes just by forcing people into doing the thing, you want done, but it breeds resentment and resistance and can perpetuate inequity by creating this dynamic of oppressor and oppressed. So power with is collaborative. It's built on respect, cooperation, and support. In this dynamic, there's an understanding that decisions and action steps are more beneficial and stronger when made by the collective. It's about solidarity as opposed to domination, and it gives individuals a voice in decision-making processes. Because of this, power with can be a strong foundation for challenging oppressive structures. Then you have power to, which has to do with the potential each of us has to create new possibilities, change, and take action without dominating relationships. It focuses on individual agency, autonomy, and self-determination, and also involves providing people with the resources, the skills, and the opportunities they need to fully realize their potential. And then lastly, power within is what it sounds like, internal. It indicates having a sense of your own capacity, potential, and self-worth, which helps us to realize our own power to and power with. This is about cultivating a sense of confidence, resilience, and agency, as well as emotional intelligence and mindfulness. Power within enables us to explore our connection to our purpose and lead with integrity, compassion, and empathy. So this tees us up for the last slide in this section. Next slide. The so what of it all comes down to a question organizations should ask themselves when engaging underrepresented communities. And this question was posed during our first session. Are you trustworthy? As an organization, are you trustworthy? The pyramid on the left demonstrates that trust is a necessary condition for constructive conflict, and constructive conflict is a necessary condition for commitment. And when these conditions are met, then accountability is possible, and that leads to results. But how much do organizations and institutions really invest in trust building and the conditions for constructive conflict that lead to accountability? I've had so many conversations with organizations and within organizations that I have worked for about accountability mechanisms and not being able to quite figure out how to do it. But, usually in organizations, what you find a lot is that the pyramid is inverted, like on the right, where the most resource allocation is given to results. And when results are the main thrust of the organization, it's easier to cut corners on accountability, and it's a domino effect the rest of the way, to where trust is just this small little thing that maybe we go have a professional development training on it, but it's not necessarily actually showing up in practice and all the mechanisms actually being integrated into the organization to put it into practice and show that it is something that is valued in practice, not just in name alone. But when you look at this inverted triangle, the ability of this model to stand on its own is fragile, with weight being inefficiently distributed. Okay. So we have just a few minutes as we're ending this section to get a couple more reflections from you all on how all of these things work together. Culture and identity, power, bias, and trust.
Thank you, Andrew. As always, we'd like to have this recorded, so anyone wants to take this thereafter, you're more than welcome. So settle back in for this next section on process challenges. And thank you, Kalia, for setting us up with this language of power and identity, and most importantly, trust. And I saw some conversation in the chat there on break of the inverted triangles and some understanding about that. And I really appreciated, because we're going to take this idea that Kalia set us up with of the nexus of our work is creating trustworthy processes in our engagement, coming mainly off of underrepresented voices and how to do this work across stakeholders. So previous session one, we kind of adapted this language of technical and adaptive, of the elements of our work that are technical, that are clear. We can hire someone, we know the direction, there's a solution. And we have this expectation that the work will be fixed. Okay, very technical elements. The adaptive work, the nebulous work, the elusive, unseen work, what's kind of under the current that's not at the forefront, is the adaptive challenge work. And we talk about processes and diagnosing processes. We call these process challenges, but we want to be very clear that we're not talking about some technical challenges, those being content challenges. Things that we encounter that are known and seen and are obvious that we can accomplish them are content challenges. Process challenges lie in the space where we have barriers between us. Power dynamics and diagnosing the type of conflicts that we have among us would be process challenges. How we work together for greater systems change, how we are ineffective at engaging underrepresented voices. The process challenges are how we navigate as humans. Okay, so when you go back to that technical and adaptive language, content challenges are very technical. Process challenges are extremely adaptive. So this is a heavy text slide. So I just want to hang out and spend some time on giving some examples of this, but more importantly, this pink hued box at the very bottom here. So technical challenges, content challenges, these lie in the very decisions and nuts and bolts and details. These are our friends that love Excels, and these are our type A personalities that know how to devise a plan and put it into action. Content challenges exist everywhere, and they're a part of the work we do. We also know that we have a clear solution forward when we are dealing with content challenges. Process adaptive challenges, on the other hand, these are the issues behind the issue. How are we working together? What are the patterns that exist in our system? And what are the possible interpretations about them? Kalia set us up with this large understanding of different power dynamics. Assessing in adaptive leadership, we call that diagnosing power in our organizations beyond who has, who hasn't. How is it effective? How is it not? How is it creating barriers? How is it holding us back? How is it propelling us forward? These are possible lenses of process challenges to look at in regards to power. Where are the competing values? What are the unseen surprises that are in our peripheral? What's outside of what's being seen that might derail the work? It might take us off course. Diagnosing our process challenges in the adaptive world looks like some of these questions below. Who in our organization sets meeting agendas? Right? It appears very technical, but the question of who may lend to some unrepresented voice space, some diagnosis of power. What processes do we have to recruit more individuals with lived experience? What are we curious about with that? Where do we have barriers with that? What patterns do we see for onboarding new volunteers? Are there barriers to our total processes if we're up on the balcony? What type of power dynamics does our organization have? Are we exhibiting that are seen? Where's the informal power in the processes in our organization? Process challenges often live in the peripheral, outside of what's seen. Those can be pressures upon us. What are the pressures upon us in the work that we do? And how is that showing up? So I want to take a quick minute before we go on to this distinction between content challenges that are very noticeable. We have a clear understanding of how we might solve these issues, and process challenges being rooted in our patterns and powers, and the real issue of what's not being seen and among our stakeholders. What's resonating with you right now? Yeah, something you said that just resonated with me is there seems to be always a deeper issue, often in the work we do. And the mechanism of keep going, go forward, right? Gosh, strategic planning partners do this, right? Is keep the plan going forward when often we experience a process challenge that's human, and there's a deeper rooted issue of power and access, right? And maybe it's an act of leadership to slow down in that work, okay? Thanks. So I'm going to ask real quick that we take our eyes off chat if you've got the chat box open, because I want to spend the next 3 to 4 minutes in this space. Clea and I talk a lot about this in our work, in this idea of power that we've just come off of, in that inverted triangle, and trust and relationships. And a lot of the experiences and tools that we're working on in this course are rooted in this space. The ability to speak from the heart. So I would just love our time and attention before we go into the activity of what this dimension of leadership entails. The key to speaking from the heart, believe it or not, it's not a professing of our stories. This is opening our hearts, which might be a stretch of our comfort zone in working with certain stakeholders. It might be in spaces where we know we need to make progress, but we're really triggered, or dare say I'm dancing in some vulnerability right now. But in order to engage these individuals, to get them up into a zone of productivity, to be more effective, speaking from my heart towards their heart is about them. It's not about us. This is an intentional act of leadership to mobilize others that's emotion with purpose. And it is going to be a stretch because it's wholly about them. And we might struggle with this if in the moment we feel the impetus and the pull to focus on what I want from this and what I need from this. But instead, I'm resisting the temptation to make this about me and really speak towards their heart. And in the work we do, we're all extremely passionate. But as Susan said earlier, what's resonating with me is strategy. How might we strategically show up to exercise leadership to be more effective? This being one tool. How might I speak from my heart towards theirs? So we have to be really curious. We have to be curious about what's resonating with others. And in our third session, I'm really excited. Powerful questions. I'll have a space there. Ask all the questions. Ask all of the curious questions. And you might have a moment to share a story with purpose. But I think this last bullet's the most important. Speaking from my heart towards theirs. We're speaking of passion, not because we're triggered. So going back to that comfort zone, our triggers are real and valid. They uniquely make us us, and they're beautiful. They're connected to our story. But engaging others to mobilize others in community action work for systemic change, I'm speaking with passion, with purpose. So taking a moment of awareness and what those triggers might be, right? What that vulnerable space is, or what you're hearing from the group of stakeholders, and think how I might be more strategic to connect my heart to theirs. And we're going to get into this afternoon a lot of work about how to work effectively with stakeholders. But this idea of speaking from my heart to theirs, let's practice it. With that, we are going to launch into a case study. We're going to take the opportunity to get into some breakout rooms and have a real life case scenario of some individuals that are dealing with conflict. There's layers of conflict. We have identity, we have power, we have trust. And so what would it look like for you all to engage in this work of diagnosis? Here's where we're headed. Susan is going to drop, we're going to be real clear on this. Susan's going to drop a Google link in the chat. Okay. You are going to be sent to your breakout rooms. And whilst you're in your breakout rooms, first you'll need to assign a note taker for everyone. So we'll need someone to be capturing some notes. You're going to take a few minutes to review that case scenario. There's a live case study. It's not fictitious. It's very real and alive. We've had someone submit this for us for an example to work through for all of you. There are discussion questions in that Google link. You are going to have a phenomenal 20 total minutes to work through this and to answer some of those questions with your note taker before we come back into the main room. The ask is, allow your conversations to go wherever they go. If you get through all the questions, that's incredible. If you run through time and you say, we're already done, I would encourage you to exercise leadership and stretch your comfort and ask some more thought-provoking, powerful questions. You're in diagnosing. You've got some ideas of identity and trust and power and raising the heat to mobilize others. You're going to diagnose this case. And then we're going to come back and we're going to have some conversation about it. So with that, Susan's going to drop the Google link in the chat. Andrew's going to get us set up for some breakout rooms. Before we do that, do I have any clarifications that someone needs? We're right on time. Facilitation team, is there anything I've missed?
You're good.
The question from Megan about recording our notes anywhere specific. Any instructions there?
Oh, I just dropped that in the chat box. They're for your own purposes. So you guys can keep track of your conversation with one another. And if there's anything you might want to share back in reflection time after this activity with the main room, that's what that's for.
Thank you, Megan. Yes, these are meaty questions. Enjoy your conversation, and we're practicing this idea of doing community work through the lens of adaptive leadership. So with that, Andrew's going to get us to breakout rooms. You'll have 20 minutes to diagnose this case scenarios. Everything is in your link. Thank you, Andrew. At the nucleus of our sociocultural systemic work, these 3 Ps that we have going forward, we're going to keep on, and I'm going to turn this over to Kalia to keep us going on how we work with these partners.
Okay, so definitely another 15 minutes for that activity would be ideal. So we appreciate you guys kind of rolling with some of our time constraints here and still trying to, as much as possible, hold space for deep conversation and connection. So all of this sets us up to get into a little bit more about partnership development. We've spent a significant amount of time establishing this foundation for interpersonal relations. So now, we talked a little bit about this in session 1. We're coming back to it so that we can end the day with a little bit about communications planning. So next slide. So first, a reminder about collaboration versus partnership, which we touched on briefly in session 1. Collaboration is short-term, partnerships are long-term. Both are critical to organizational capacity, but in project leadership, we're focusing on creating a sustainable ecosystem. So this slide underscores the difference between the two, partnership and collaboration. And if you're reading through this, you'll notice that the trust theme is coming up again, and also a bit about resource allocation in the form of risk and reward. So just a quick note, if you're having trouble reading anything too, I'm happy to read out loud, but you will also have access to the slides after this session. let's go to the next slide. So this is a slide or concept that we refer to in another facilitation team that I'm a part of, coming together for racial understanding. And this is a place for quick self-assessment among team members or partners. So starting here at the top, is the approach to success efficient, where the goal is to get work done quickly? Or does it lean toward effectiveness, where the goal is to be deliberate in the way you work together, even if it takes more time? Are people disconnected, not knowing much about one another except what's necessary to complete the work, the task at hand? Or are people connected beyond what's required for the job? And then lastly, are communications transactional, solely focusing on tasks that need to be accomplished? Or is it more relational, where personal check-ins are the norm? And there's an understanding that there's an ebb and flow in our projects and things that we're working on, different people that we work with at different times, where this can change, this can shift. Let's go to the next slide. So session one, we presented this tool, but we focused on step 4, resource sharing. And although we don't have time to go through every piece of this tool, I do encourage you to use it. It's very user-friendly and will help you in developing a comprehensive outreach and engagement plan. So you will be able to access the link to this when we share the slides, but Susan can also drop it in the chat box. And to prepare us to go into the next activity, I'll at least point out 7 partnership types that are identified in this tool. So you have practitioner network partnerships, or the peer organizations and networks you connect with to learn, better accomplish your goals, meet other types of partners, etc. So for example, if you're a staff member of a farmer's market association in your region or state could be considered a network partner. Then community partnerships are, of course, the community members and stakeholders within whatever your project service area is, and they may also inform your program design, the execution of that program, and or evaluation. Then we have supply chain partnerships, and that includes partners such as food vendors who can help you find and source local healthy food. Specific examples include a food hub, a distributor, farmers, processors, or other intermediary type who can make sourcing connections. You also have cross-sector partnerships, and that includes those partners whose work intersects with and complement yours so that you can both advance your goals. So if I were to return to this farmers market example, and you're a staff member, a cross-sector partner might be a public health institution who provides nutrition education at the market. We also have very critical funding partnerships, and that includes the ecosystem of partners with financial resources like sponsors, donors, philanthropic organizations, and others who support your work. Funding partners can be really crucial advocates for your work, even when they're not providing funding directly, though. So cultivating those partnerships further. Advocacy partnerships are valuable in that if you're limited in your ability to engage in policy advocacy or lobbying, partnership gives you the opportunity to inform direct action and participate when possible. So just a little bit about advocacy. Keep in mind that advocacy differs from lobbying. Advocacy focuses on providing information, education on a topic, whereas lobbying makes a specific ask or to support or act on a piece of legislation. So not all organizations and institutions are in a position to directly advocate or lobby for public policy changes, But your voice and experience as a practitioner can be crucial to promoting supportive policy changes. And I'll also note something that we all are probably aware of on this call, that, federal grant dollars can't be used for activities related to lobbying. A lot of foundation dollars cannot be used for that as well. And then finally, our last type of partnership is support and technical assistance partnerships, which actively provide expert training and technical support to your work. And they could be based anywhere. So for example, farmers market, your staff member, a food safety specialist could be a TA partner. So I'll list some of those partnerships. I'll list those partnerships in the chat box here shortly, but with this, Tina is going to lead you all through a stakeholder identification activity.
Yeah. Hey, Kalia, thanks so much. Hey, folks, I want to recognize we've been doing a lot of work. And so I just want to take a moment to ground our bodies and get recentered. So I want to take 3 cleansing breaths, or however you need to get centered, clear your thoughts and head. We've had a lot of content and we're going to go into another big one. So we'll just take 30 seconds, stand, move your bodies, stretch, do what you need to do to come into this next content space. We are cerebral engaged, our minds are churning, we're emotionally engaged, thinking of the work we do, that we're out in communities, and it's a lot in a short amount of time. So thank you. And this next exercise, I'm going to be with you for about the next 20 minutes. Similar to your comfort zone, you're going to be doing some of your own mapping. And this is how to work with different groups of stakeholders. I have some new language around faction mapping and identifying who needs to do the work, right? Our aim here is to mobilize others. We're engaging others productively. We are purposeful. And as Susan said, my favorite word today is strategic. Identifying these partnerships and whom needs to do the work. So consider this challenge that you've been grappling with. I see in the chat, Olivia, you said this, you're having some light bulbs of where you've been stuck. You're onto something when you identify the space where you're stuck. If you are stuck, you're in an adaptive challenge. And as you look at this challenge, who might need to be a part of that work? Who are the partnerships that you have engaged? Who are the partnerships that need to be engaged? I like to say, if you elevated this challenge in the center of a room, whose eyes need to be on it? Okay. So the adaptive leadership tool tied to this is faction mapping. And we're going to have a faction map activity. You're going to be doing this, and the link to a faction map and everything you're going to do in the next 20 minutes is in the shared Google Drive. It's at the end of the slides. You have all this, all right? But first, a little content of what is a faction, okay? This word has a connotation, and that's very intentional. Factions are not just groups of identified stakeholders. It's multiple stakeholders that represent a vested interest in your challenge. They share common values and perspectives on this issue. They're loyal to some of the similar modes of doing the work, people, and ideas. A faction can be bound together by a shared sense of loss or risk. If you make progress on this, this group may risk losing something. And the reason we do faction work is often when we talk about engaging stakeholders, we get stuck in how we engage them. Okay? And we're in this adaptive space. We've been talking about process challenges and not just fixing what is seen on the surface. Process challenges, the issue behind the issue. And we elevate partnerships and working with partners in communities. It requires us to look at them at a deeper level. And the takeaway here is all of the faction work we're doing, the individuals we're engaged, other groups, nonprofits, community members, they hold values and loyalties within them, and they risk losing something if we make progress on this challenge. What are the values that this faction holds? What are the deeply held beliefs that are significant to them, that bind them together? What are their loyalties? What's their dedication in relation to this issue? If I make progress on this challenge, if I make progress on this, what might they lose? Faction work requires a lens of deep diagnosis of whom these individuals are, whom this group is. And I often say, we want to tell this in a noble way. It's very easy in community work to get stuck in the trap of, I've not worked well with that group, and I'm going to tell myself a story about them and create barriers. Right? The idea of speak from my heart towards their heart might just be, what is this faction loyal to? What are the values underneath this faction? And if I make progress on this, what might they lose? And how might I speak to that loss? Faction work is a sense of diagnosing how to mobilize others. This work is not done with the yes faction, and that's often easy. I know the yes people I need to surround myself. That is not adaptive leadership, and that's not where effective in our projects and our community action work. We're not effective with surrounding ourselves with organizations and people that are always in agreement. So a deeper diagnosis of what this faction possesses, entails, what they're about, will help us and understand how we might engage them. Susan's word, strategic. So I want us to take a few minutes, and I'm going to model this for you through a situation I've been dealing with. But first and foremost, this idea of faction mapping. Do you see the arrows going in? All factions should have eyes or a vested interest on this challenge. Something you're really stuck at and you really want to make some progress on. Whom are these groups? Whom are these groups? So I'm going to take 2 to 3 minutes, whatever workspace you have, jot your challenge, this adaptive challenge you've been trying to make some progress on. You came in today's session identifying the technical elements of it, the adaptive pieces of it. Now we're going to put through the lens, whom do you need to engage? Take just a moment and identify 3 to 4. If you can get through 5, that would be amazing. Another minute. Hey, your faction work is going to grow, and it's going to be exponential, and that's the point. It's a diagnosis of how to identify those that we need to mobilize going forward. And I'll share with you real quick. Before the pandemic, March of 2019, I had a harebrained idea. We're landlocked in the middle of Kansas. I'm in the center of Kansas. I told some of you, I think I'm about 75 miles from the geographic center of the United States. It's pretty cool. But I'm a cyclist. I'm an endurance gravel cyclist, and I was a teacher for 14 years. And I had this harebrained idea that getting kids on bikes could be really advantageous in the times that we're living, and just for a lot of purpose reasons in my heart. So I rallied a vagabond group of about 5 other cyclists, and we sat down at a kitchen table in Kansas City and Lenexa, and I said, hey, what if we got kids on bikes? And they said, how do we do that, Tina? Looking to me as the authority. And I said, I don't know. It's just an idea. But I proposed to them a faction map. They're not adaptive leadership practitioners. They're not in this space whatsoever. They're cyclists. But we sat down at a kitchen table and we mapped the factions around this issue of kids on bikes. And I potentially thought, well, there's funders we need to engage. We need to engage Parks and Rec. We need to engage bike shops. We need to engage kids. We need to engage parents. Whom else might we need to engage?
Schools,
Schools. Whom else?
parents.
Yeah, this is great. Your faction map work grows as you realize this challenge needs more eyes on it. And who might those eyes be? So I'm going to pull out this faction of parents. I'm going to show you what this work looks like and where I'm going to encourage us to go together. This idea of parents. Around the kitchen table, myself and 4 other gentlemen, there's 5 of us having this conversation about kids on bikes in Kansas. And the notion of engaging parents came up. And our conversation went to, what type of parents? What about parents that don't have biological children with them all the time? They have split parent households. What about multi-generational parents? What about parents with foster children? What about parents? And the list went on and on and on. And we started diagnosing this faction of parents, right? And this is the work we're doing. When we're thinking about how do I go forth to engage parents effectively, I need to be really curious about what they value. What do parents value in relation to getting kids on bikes? Well, what are parents loyal to? And if I make progress and we're successful and kids are on bikes all over Kansas, newsflash, they're absolutely successful. It's a wild, beautiful thing we have, Kansas NICA. But what might parents lose? When I start looking at partnerships and engaging partners, a deeper diagnosis is understanding them. And this is what faction mapping is about. So take a couple minutes. Let's practice this. Well, live case scenario here in the room. What are parents valuing in relation to their kids getting on bikes? What do you think?
Safety.
What else? Great.
Having an activity so that they can take a break.
Get a break from their kids. This is great. Perfect. This is faction work. What else do parents value?
Getting their kids outside.
Good, Vanessa.
More independence for their kids.
Yeah, great, Jacob. You're nailing it. Let's get 2 more.
Got several coming in the chat box too.
Financially accessible.
Yes, thanks, Bonnie Murphy. Thanks. Financial accessibility. Okay, Kalia, a couple from the chat.
Getting
Sure.
away from screens.
Yep.
We've got cost, community, activity and exercise, mental
Wonderful.
physical health.
You're doing faction mapping. What are they loyal to? What are their loyalties? Other groups of individuals or a way of doing things. What are they loyal to? Loyalties might be barriers, possibly.
What they know.
I'm loyal to what I know, and I'm also loyal to the sport that I understand. And this bike stuff doesn't exist. I know sport, traditional. I know running, I know basketball, I know volleyball, I know track, and now you're talking about bikes as sport? That doesn't compute. Good. What else are they loyal to?
Here in the chat, we've got other parents, work.
I'm loyal to other parents, right? Great. Any other loyalties that you can think of that parents might be binded by? What binds them together? What are they loyal to?
More chat responses.
Great.
Fears or danger, budgets.
Thank you. Whoever elevated the intangible. We may be loyal to intangible things. I'm loyal to protecting, right? I have fear that if my children embark on bikes as a sport, that looks different than a baseball field. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And lastly, if we make progress on this, if we're really successful of getting kids on bikes, what might parents lose? Get some voices and come off mute. What do you think?
Maybe some loss of control over what their children are doing with their free time.
Absolutely.
And also, maybe they get more interested in bikes than the other thing that the parent thought that they should be doing.
Yeah, Catherine, you are articulating competing values, and that is a loss. Well, my kiddo's always been wildly successful in soccer, and they're coming into their freshman year, and soccer may be their sport, and now they're interested in bikes because that's what their friends are doing. I'm going to experience loss. It's a competing value. Yeah.
It might also be something not everybody can cycle. So it could be something that if the parents can't cycle, they lose the ability of doing an activity with their kids.
You're absolutely nailing it. Right. Great answers. Great.
The fear or concern that they'll be hit by a car or get injured.
Yeah, injury. That's real. But I can control running on a track. I don't know when you put my child on a bike. I may lose the ability to protect them in injury, right? This is faction work and working across factions. You all will engage with this, right? And the cool thing about this tool is I identify in my challenge, right, all of these factions and groups and individuals that I need to engage, but it helps me prioritize. It helps me prioritize where my work might be most effective. And in youth cycling, is it more effective to start engaging parents? Is it more effective to start engaging bike shops? Was it more effective to start engaging schools? Through a deeper diagnosis of what they're loyal to, what their values are. Do we have common values? Am I able to speak to that loss? Helps me do the engagement of all of these groups. So these two boxes down here, I just want to bring attention to them. It's a good priority tool to say the degree to which they care about this issue and the degree to which I need them to care. So I'd like to take just a couple minutes. I want to hold 2 to 3 minutes and revisit your challenge. You hopefully jotted a couple of factions down. And if you could pull one of your factions that you know you need to work with, let's just try one and work through one box. Let's just take 2 to 3 minutes, identify whom this faction is that you need to engage, this partnership, and just put some thoughts on what do they value? What are they loyal to? And if I make progress and we move the venue for our Winners Farmers Market, what might they risk losing? Just work through those three.
I would ask why
Yes.
you don't also have a what could they win on this?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Because
what might they win?
I think that the failure mode for a lot of people is what would they want in exchange, or how could this be a win-win, or how can you mitigate that loss, more than just the question, what do they lose? Because I think it's a question of framing often.
Yeah, thank you, Covington. And this idea of loss is acknowledging that to make progress on some challenges, there's inherent loss. And we want to be able to speak to that for them. Yes. Yes, the wins, absolutely. I'd put some wins up of how we may be able to speak to the wins of what they value. That's a great point. we'll take a couple minutes just to spend some time on thinking deeper of a faction that you really need to engage, partnerships that you really need to engage. Okay. Thank you for spending some time in diagnosing who might need to do this work to help make progress on your challenge and engaging some of those identified partners in faction work. You will have a faction map. It's going to be in the shared drive, so you'll have access to this and grow your faction map. This is the aim. We're in diagnosis on the balcony of how we need to deploy others to do this work. So with that, I'm going to keep on going. Kalia, can you help us with some more external
All right.
engagement?
So last section of the day, before we get into some open reflection time, you guys may have noticed that now with going to public engagement strategies, we've been building from these interpersonal person-to-person interactions to these organization level interactions to the broader public now. And, you know, the point that Covington brought up just a second ago is a good lead in, just to say that unfortunately, we don't have enough time to get into strategic communication strategy for partners, but this starts to lay the groundwork for that. So my background personally is in strategic communications and policy advocacy, and that is an entire training series unto itself. But we can talk about public engagement strategy in general. And also, having been a community organizer, I like to bring in organizing principles into the conversation when possible. So even if you're not focused on organizing, which directly confronts power, that is the thing about community organizing, still recognizing the power dynamics in any interaction is critical to partnership building. And, you know, you may very well be the one in power or perceived to be in power in whatever engagement is happening. So this here is a graphic illustration of something called Arnstein's Ladder of Citizen Participation. That's on the left. And it's intersecting with labor and organizing perspectives. So this shows that where there is increasing potential for social reform and transfer of power, outlining forms of engagement that marginalize, tokenize, and empower constituents through advocacy, mobilization, and organizing actions. So really, you can spend more time with this outside of this training, but the takeaway from this graphic is to determine what your purpose is in working with the broader public and how different forms of engagement may help or hinder your goals. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, So this graphic tool, Susan will drop a link in the chat box for this shortly. It's from the International Association of Public Participation, and it gets even more specific on types of engagement for increasing public impact. It offers public engagement goals, what promise those goals are making to the public, and specific examples of technical application. So, for example, if your goal is to consult with the community, your focus is on gaining feedback on an analysis, alternatives, and/or decisions being proposed or more likely already made. The promise you're making to the public is that you'll keep them informed, listen to and acknowledge concerns and aspirations, and provide feedback on how public input influence the decision. You might use public comment at a city commission meeting, surveys and focus groups, or public meetings to do this. However, if your goal is to collaborate with the community, your focus is on partnering with the public in each aspect of design, including the development of alternatives and the identification of the preferred solution. Your promise is that you'll look to the public for advice and innovation in formulating solutions and incorporate their advice and recommendations into the decisions to the maximum extent possible. And in this circumstance, you might establish citizen advisory committees, consensus building processes, and participatory decision making. So next slide. Final tool that I'll show here, and Susan will drop another link in the chat box, is giving even more options for specific public engagement strategies. This is from the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation, and it offers these dialogue and deliberation streams of engagement, identifying first, second, and third order goals for public engagement. So first order goals include issue learning, improved democratic attitudes and skills, and improved relationships. Second order goals include transforming conflicts, individual and collective action, and improved institutional decision making. And then third order goals include improved community problem solving and increased civic capacity. And then there are corresponding streams of practice. Exploratory conversations are where people learn about themselves, their community, and even come up with ideas. Conflict transformation conversations seek to tackle poor relations or a specific conflict. Decision-making conversations seek to improve public knowledge of a decision with policy impact, and collaborative action is about tackling complex problems with the public and taking responsibility for the solutions developed. So one example I'll give, and maybe this sounds familiar, is that maybe you have found yourself in a decision-making conversation. At least that's what one person or group is trying to do, but everybody else is thinking this is an exploratory conversation. So somebody wants a decision, but everyone else is like, what is going on here? So we've got a mismatch in what's happening in our situation that can cause conflict. Let's go to the next slide. This is just a continuation of this tool. I know the print is very small here, but again, you've got the link in the chat box and you'll have access to the slides. For each of the goals listed here, there is a certain type of dialogue with key features that is needed and associated community issues. So this outlines guidance on when to leverage different kinds of dialogue processes and why, with some key design questions included to ask yourself as you're planning the dialogue process alongside proposed dialogue and deliberation formats. So Tina and I have given trainings on or included many of the formats listed here through our respective work with the Kansas Leadership Center and the Institute of Civic Discourse and Democracy, and just, being facilitators on different issues within the community. Next slide. So all together with these tools, with these strategies, with these processes, it gets us to developing communications plans. Mostly ready. So the steps of the communication plan are clear. Step 1, select an appropriate communications plan template. Step 2, conduct an audit of your current communication materials. Step 3, set SMART and/or PACT goals for your plan based on the results from your audit. Step 4, identify the audience to whom you plan to deliver your communication plan. Step 5, outline and write your plan, keeping your audiences in mind. Step 6, determine the channels on which you need to deliver your messages. Step 7, decide which team members are responsible for delivering the message. Step 8, estimate a timeline for how long each step should take. And step 9, measure the results of your plan after presenting to stakeholders and determine success and areas for improvement. So the thing is, once you introduce different types of engagement and messaging for different stakeholders, so that strategic communications piece that we didn't have enough time to get into, it takes some time to pull this whole communications plan together. But clear, consistent communications really are worth their weight in gold. And once upon a time, I was a media marketing consultant, building strategic brand communications and campaigns for local and national clients. And ultimately, that translated into my career in advocacy. So definitely strategic communications and what it can do for your project is really essential. So the next slides that we're going to get into are going to cover some options for step 1 here and a framework for step 2, but we've already provided some content and process tools on steps 3, 4, 7, and 8 between the 2 sessions that we've had with you. And as for step 9, we will get into some of that next week. And I also want to emphasize in closing this part out that our purpose through this training series is not just to say, here's the tool, go build it out. It's knowing how to apply the tools through the development of skills and competencies related to them. Next slide. So going back to step 1, selecting an appropriate communications plan. I've aggregated a few resources for you all to peruse outside of this session, and Susan will put that in the chat. I've used Smartsheet, ClickUp, Constant Contact, MailChimp, and just a note that many of these CRM customer relations management platforms will also include marketing functions that outreach and engagement. And we will provide more task managing platforms in our final session next week. Next slide. Okay, so that's step 2 about the communications audit framework. Essentially, like, this is optional, but it is a recommended step. A communications audit analyzes current communications materials and provides relevant data and insights on future plans. So it's helpful when you're auditing what you have on hand and how effective it is. If you're going to, it's really helpful if you're going to be trying to leverage this to influence a behavior or an action, as in the case of an advocacy campaign, for example. So it's important that you would have a communications goal in mind when you're auditing your materials. I'm trying to do this, so what I have on hand, does it match up with what I'm trying to do? Do I have to produce new things? The 5 M's that are outlined here, mission, message, media, measurement, and method, are also useful just for general communications planning. Let's go to the next slide. That's it.
Great.
We're ready for a reflection, Tina.
Yes. Hey, folks, it's been a fast and furious day of learning and content. Before we do this, I do want to acknowledge right here, when you get your slide deck, these are all live links, especially to the shared drive, which has all of the resources available to you, and et cetera, for your tools and your templates. So those are all available at your disposal. But let's just take about 10, 12 minutes before we round out our time together of sitting in some thought, processing, making sense. What's landing and really sticky with you? What might be something that stuck today that you're going to take forward? And this idea that we're here for project management to be more effective in community change and the leadership that's required in that work and how it all glues together.